When Jordan first stumbled upon the idea that individuals could challenge traditional financial and legal systems, he felt both skeptical and intrigued. For years, he had been living under the assumption that his finances and legal standing were firmly locked within the rules of traditional institutions, banks, credit systems, courts. But recently, a mentor, Chris, had mentioned something that seemed revolutionary: the concept of reclaiming personal autonomy within the financial system. "We're on the air," Chris had said during one of their initial conversations, a subtle warning for Jordan to pay close attention. Chris outlined an approach to finances that had nothing to do with common credit strategies and everything to do with understanding one's standing as an American executive postmaster. Jordan initially thought it sounded like something out of an obscure legal thriller, but Chris explained that it was more grounded than it seemed. Act 1: The Executor's Awakening. According to Chris, everyone is the executive officer of their financial life, with inherent rights to oversee and command actions on their accounts. This role meant that Jordan could leverage certain rights in the court system, and he wasn't bound to be a mere executor in probate but the executive in charge of his accounts. When probate issues arose, he would be able to claim an executive status over his financial assets, demanding transparency and proof of claims from creditors. As Jordan explored these ideas, he encountered legal jargon and strategies he'd never heard of before. Terms like probate court jurisdiction, executive veto of bills, and even American postmaster began to fill his notes. Each night, he'd review these phrases, feeling like he was learning a secret language of autonomy. Act 2: Challenging the System. Emboldened by his growing understanding, Jordan decided to test one of the methods Chris had suggested: the executive veto of a financial charge. He received a hefty bill from a utility company and, instead of immediately paying it, he annotated the document with what he had learned. He wrote, "Not accepted for value. Vetoed by the executive authority of this account." Then he signed, dated, and mailed it back, fully expecting a counteraction. To his surprise, the utility company's response was muted. They requested verification, but Jordan realized that his assertive language, backed by a growing confidence in his standing, had actually influenced the outcome. He wasn't dismissed, and the company was forced to acknowledge his query as if he were negotiating from a position of authority. Act 3: Reclaiming Authority and Identity. One of the more abstract concepts Chris introduced was the idea of being a natural entity rather than a conventional U.S. citizen bound by corporate statutes. This status shift was said to grant individuals greater legal leverage, allowing them to act as custodians of their accounts instead of subordinates to government entities. To Jordan, this was an entirely new perspective on identity. Through this lens, he began exploring the idea of executive postmaster as both a title and a right, a legal position that allowed him to hold administrative institutions accountable. With every case he handled, Jordan felt like he was stepping further into a role he was born for but never knew existed. Act 4: Facing the Challenge. Jordan's newfound authority was tested when a friend, Alex, was charged in a mortgage-related case. Inspired by what he had learned, Jordan explained to Alex that he could assign an executor within the legal system, like the Postmaster General, to oversee the case and verify the legitimacy of the charges. Alex, unsure of this unorthodox approach, followed Jordan's guidance, submitting his documents and designating the Postmaster General as the executor. While they waited for a response, Jordan prepared for resistance. Yet, instead of outright rejection, Alex's legal case was shifted, becoming a question of proof for the charging party, not an automatic sentence. Alex was astonished and relieved. For Jordan, it was proof of concept, a sign that even in an entrenched system, there were ways to assert personal authority and autonomy. Conclusion: a new path forward. Jordan's journey into financial autonomy had revealed a complex and powerful framework, hidden beneath traditional systems. He began to view himself not as a passive participant but as a proactive figure, a financial custodian, an American executive, a natural entity with rights and responsibilities. Through this journey, Jordan didn't just gain tools to handle his finances, he acquired a new understanding of his role in a system that most people accepted without question. And as he continued on his path, helping others challenge the system, he knew he had unlocked not just a method but a movement, one of empowerment, independence, and, ultimately, a reclamation of personal sovereignty. For most of his life, Samuel believed his identity was as straightforward as the documents in his wallet, a driver's license, a passport, a social security card. These items told the world who he was, a U.S. citizen, bound by the rules and rights of his country. But in a turn of events that felt like stepping through a hidden door, he was introduced to an entirely different idea of what citizenship could mean. The person guiding him through this was no ordinary friend but a mentor steeped in unique legal philosophies, someone who saw beyond the lines of official identity markers. Act 1, The Hidden Meaning of Identity. "We're more than the paperwork in our pockets," his mentor, Chris, had said over coffee one afternoon, as Samuel wrestled with some recent legal troubles. Chris continued, "The way we think of citizenship, whether U.S. Canadian, or anything else, is really just a narrow way of looking at it." Samuel raised an eyebrow, wondering what he meant. According to Chris, Samuel wasn't just a U.S. citizen, he was a natural entity, a term used to describe an identity outside the scope of a single government or nation. This natural entity status, Chris explained, allowed individuals to act with authority over their accounts and assets rather than under the direct control of a system that treated them as mere custodians. It was a radical concept. Instead of being bound by standard rules, Samuel could claim a kind of sovereignty, a way to exist beyond borders. Act 2, A Clash with the System. The true test of these ideas came when Samuel found himself entangled in a legal dispute over an unpaid utility bill. Typically, he would have simply paid up or arranged a payment plan. But with his newfound perspective, Samuel decided to challenge the bill in a way he never would have before. He drafted a letter to the company, introducing himself not as Mr. Samuel Reynolds, U.S. citizen, but as Samuel, executor, and natural entity. He questioned the company's right to bill him under their corporate laws, asserting that as a natural entity, he wasn't bound by the same obligations as a standard citizen. To his surprise, the response he received was not a standard rejection but an inquiry for further verification. This was the first time he saw the walls of the system shake, if only slightly. Here was an institution bound by its protocols, pausing to consider an approach it hadn't encountered before. Samuel had always been a rule follower, but now he was learning what it meant to assert his own authority, a natural authority that came from his existence, not from paperwork. Act 3. The Executor's Role and Responsibility. Through further guidance, Chris explained the role of the executor in financial matters, a title Samuel learned was much more than a legal designation. By identifying as an executor, Samuel was stepping into a role that granted him oversight and decision-making power, not unlike a CEO of a corporation. This position allowed him to challenge claims, ask for verifications, and even reject charges that couldn't be substantiated. "It's like being your own country," Chris had explained. "You're taking back the authority that most people don't even realize they can claim." The metaphor resonated with Samuel. If he were a country, he was its leader, responsible for negotiating on its behalf. But instead of dealing with trade policies or diplomacy, he was negotiating the terms of his finances, his legal standing, and his place in society. Every interaction with a billing agency, credit bureau, or government office became a conversation between entities rather than a directive from an authority. Act 4, Discovering a New Form of Citizenship. Embracing this identity as a natural entity began changing how Samuel saw himself beyond his legal interactions. He started reading about concepts of nationality, sovereignty, and identity in ancient and modern contexts, discovering how people throughout history had created identities that existed alongside but separate from national borders. Samuel realized that while U.S. citizenship provided certain protections and benefits, it wasn't the limit of his identity. In fact, claiming his identity as a natural entity was as empowering as it was enlightening, allowing him to think of himself as part of a global continuum of individuals who prioritized autonomy over allegiance to a single nation. It wasn't about denying his U.S. citizenship but expanding his understanding of what it meant to belong to a country, a community, or even the world. He reflected on the implications of this stance for others like him. Many people went through life unaware that they could approach institutions and financial systems with authority rather than submission. Samuel's journey opened doors for him, and he felt an urge to share this perspective with others who might feel restricted by the conventional definitions of identity. Conclusion: Living beyond borders. Over time, Samuel grew into his role as a natural entity and executor of his own affairs. His newfound identity did not exempt him from all legal obligations, but it redefined the way he approached them. No longer did he see himself merely as a cog in a corporate wheel, bound by every mandate of the system. Instead, he was a sovereign individual, a country of one. Samuel's journey was not about rejecting his U.S. citizenship but about understanding that his identity was richer, broader, and more complex than the narrow definitions often imposed by documents. And as he continued down this path, he knew that he had tapped into something profound, a way to exist beyond borders, with a sense of authority and autonomy that he had only just begun to explore. When Erica first accepted a position in the legal department of a large financial services firm, she thought she understood the dynamics of power. The company worked hand in hand with government agencies, issuing loans, mortgages, and corporate bonds that fueled not only its profits but also national projects. But it didn't take long for Erica to notice the complexities and moral ambiguities of the partnership. It was a tight weave of authority, mutual benefit, and control, a relationship that left little room for public interest to thrive. Act 1: The Public-Private Veil. Erica had joined the firm with the hope of making an impact. She'd been captivated by the promise that the company supported public good projects, from clean energy initiatives to infrastructure improvements. It was in the firm's DNA, they said, to align corporate growth with national priorities. But early on, during a meeting with a government liaison, Erica saw a side of the partnership that wasn't in the company's polished brochures. The project under discussion, a major highway expansion, was marketed as a public good to streamline commutes and boost local economies. However, much of the conversation centered around how to maximize toll revenue, and Erica soon realized that the project's primary focus was profit, not public benefit. She watched as the firm's executives used their influence to bypass environmental regulations and speed up approvals that, in any other scenario, would have taken years. In these discussions, public interest seemed more like an afterthought, dressed up to justify corporate gains. To her growing unease, Erica began to understand that the lines between corporate objectives and governmental authority were deeply blurred. Act 2: The Power Dynamics of Compliance. Her role quickly brought her face to face with the regulatory systems that supposedly held corporations accountable. One day, Erica was tasked with drafting a compliance report for a new lending initiative, one that would make loans more accessible to small businesses in underserved areas. The project looked noble on the surface. Still, a deeper dive into the terms revealed troubling details, exorbitant interest rates and conditions that would almost certainly leave many borrowers in debt. Erica raised her concerns in a meeting, asking if the initiative would comply with new consumer protection laws. But her supervisor, Jeff, dismissed her worries, explaining that the company's lobbyists had secured exceptions to the regulations. "The law isn't set in stone," he said, smiling. "We help shape it." As her eyes opened further to the corporate influence on policy, Erica started seeing the delicate game being played. Lobbyists ensured the company's interests were preserved, bending rules when necessary, while marketing teams promoted the narrative of benevolence. And as the government reaped tax revenue and economic growth from these ventures, the boundaries of responsibility seemed to fade. Erica was caught in the middle, struggling to find her footing in a space where power dynamics trumped accountability. Act 3: The Outsider's Dilemma. One day, Erica received a call from a friend working at a nonprofit watchdog group. Her friend, Alana, was investigating the company's involvement in the highway project, suspecting that corners had been cut in the bidding process. She wanted to know if Erica could confirm any details. Torn, Erica hesitated. Her loyalty was to her company, but she was increasingly uncomfortable with what she had seen. Sharing information would put her job at risk, yet staying silent felt complicit. Alana's questions hung over Erica in the following days, weighing on her during strategy meetings and compliance briefings. She began to see that the firm's power came not just from money but from the government's implicit approval of their methods. This wasn't just about legal gray areas, It was a matter of unchecked authority where both the company and the government operated without the scrutiny they claimed to uphold. In one particularly frustrating meeting, Erica asked how the firm balanced its commitments to both public interest and profit. Jeff replied without hesitation, "The two aren't mutually exclusive. If we do well, the country does well." But Erica felt the hollowness in his words. She understood now that the partnership between the firm and the government wasn't a union of equals, it was a fusion of corporate influence and government authority that left little room for genuine public oversight. Act 4, Choosing a Side. Haunted by her conscience, Erica decided to act. She began quietly gathering documents, summaries of meetings, and emails that highlighted the manipulation behind public projects. While she didn't necessarily want to bring down her firm, she did feel a responsibility to make the public aware of the ways that corporate power was eroding government accountability. When she finally met with Alana again, Erica provided her with details of the firm's involvement in the highway project, pointing out the discrepancies between the project's public narrative and its private intentions. She explained how the firm's lobbyists had leveraged government connections to skirt regulations, to the detriment of both the environment and taxpayer money. The decision wasn't easy, and Erica worried about the potential fallout. But as she handed over the documents, she felt a strange sense of liberation. She had chosen to stand on the side of transparency, a value she realized was alarmingly absent in the world she'd been part of. Conclusion: The awakening of accountability. As Alana's organization published the findings, Erica watched the story ripple across news outlets. Government officials scrambled to issue statements, promising to reevaluate the terms of the highway project and reconsider the partnership with Erica's firm. The company itself issued a guarded response, emphasizing its commitment to public good while downplaying the specifics of the report. Erica was fired shortly after, but she had expected it. She had known that her decision would likely close doors in the corporate world, yet she was at peace with the price of integrity. Through her journey, Erica had seen the dark side of public-private partnerships, where corporations could wield governmental power without facing the same scrutiny. Her decision to expose the truth marked a step toward restoring the balance, a reminder that transparency and accountability could, and should, be reclaimed. For Erica, the experience was a profound lesson in the power dynamics that shape societies. It taught her that the duty to challenge unchecked authority lies not just with governments or watchdogs, but with individuals who dare to question the systems that hold sway over public and private lives alike.